With 2025 coming to a close, a constant question has loomed over the year, at least in some variation. Who is the best of the best? Who is the top 10 pound for pound? And what should the ordering be? Now, when it comes to this specific topic, a lot of discussion essentially becomes noise as many factors are straight up irrelevant. Take an ESPN, Top Rank, DAZN, Ring Magazine, top 10 pound for pound, or whichever other site you would like to use, and you'll see various levels of inconsistencies or propaganda, where Top Rank, of course, is going to throw in their fighters over, say, a PBC fighter, etc., etc. To make this clear from the get-go, the current pound for pound list is of course only referring to current events. Now, how you define current is where things get subjective and where lists tend to differ. No matter what, we're analyzing fights and events from this year, but given that these fights hold the weight that they do because of the previous year, I decided to include both this year, 2025, and last year, 2024, when deciding my rankings. Maybe you could extend this to 2023, but at some point, the more you extend the year count, the less relevant they become for the current fights. So for the purposes of this video, we will only be looking at the events and fights from 2024 and 2025 only. This means fighters who have been around for several years and did something impressive in, say, 2018 doesn't mean anything in this context. We're only looking at these 2 years. It should also be noted, official decisions will never tell the full outcome, so we're not solely going to be looking at a win as a good thing and a loss as a bad thing. This will become a lot more clear during the ranking. Lastly, and like always, things like achievements and status in terms of popularity and money have no bearing and have zero relevance in determining how good or bad you are. The only things that matter are who you faced and how you performed. Now, there were some close admissions that almost got in, but just missing the cut is Jai Opetaia, who of course was still dominant in 2025, but is still primarily living off the Briedis wins of a few years ago and last year. Other than last year's bout against Briedis, he has faced at best solid opposition, and while you could say it's not his fault because Ramirez is ducking him if you are someone that prescribes to that, he still has yet to fight him, and we're not ranking fighters based off the possibility of a win or a loss against Ramirez. They're simply fighters who have faced much better opposition up to this point and have a better case to make the list. Shakur Stevenson is in a similar situation. He's had 3 good defenses at lightweight between 2024 and 2025, and his only opponent worth noting is Zepeda, who's good but nothing outstanding. Of course, Shakur in recent form has looked great, and next year he's going to be gearing up to fight Teofimo Lopez, so he's clearly going to be in a much stronger position next year, assuming that he wins. And the last fighter who almost made the cut was David Benavidez. This one was pretty difficult not to include because I think Benavidez has only fought quality opposition up to this point and has progressively looked better and better since his first fight at 175, especially with his utter destruction against Yard most recently. However, he slightly misses the top 10, and that's just because everyone has faced slightly better opposition, which then takes us to number 10. Number 10 is Vergil Ortiz. Ortiz is in a very similar situation to Benavidez, only being 3 fights deep into a new division. There's also similar narratives of power that have occurred during their runs, funny enough. However, Ortiz has fought better opposition. Of course, we also have to include his final 2 bouts at 147 against Lawson and Delorme last year, but the bulk of what's getting him this high is his bouts at 154 against Boachuk, Madrimov, and his recent 2-round destruction of Erickson Lubin. With Madrimov being the clear best out of the names on both resumes in recent fights, Ortiz is also coming into 2026 with a lot of momentum as his stock has greatly risen since last year, and he has some big time fights on the table as he has some potential to rise even higher on the list. However, I will say if Benavidez does go on to defeat Bivol or even move up a division and beat Opetaia and win, I do think Benavidez is going to be in a pretty strong spot to secure a top 10 spot next year. Now at number 9, we have Kensho Taraji. If this list was looking at the totality of careers, Taraji would easily be in the top 10 currents, if not quite a bit higher in it. But even still, his recent opposition has been pretty good, where at the beginning of last year, he had a great performance against Canizales, moving up a division, stopping Rosales, and then stopping Yuri Akui. We then get, of course, his loss against Sandoval, which, to be fair, this fight was close and reasonably could have gone to Taraji, being one massive back and forth fight. Of course, we also have to throw in the fact that Japan has a weird decision against their own home fighters, where a lot of people do think Taraji should have gotten the decision. Now, even at face value and saying Taraji lost this contest, one loss doesn't negate what he has done between this year and last year, especially when you add in the context it was close, and the fight could have gone either way. It's not anything to trash Taraji for. Really, ever since the turn of the new decade, Taraji has consistently fought great opposition. It would have been very interesting to see how he would have done at 115 for the IBF title, but that might come next year. Could be a bit higher or lower by this time next year depending on how that goes. At number 8, and kind of Taraji's lower division counterpart, is Oscar Collazo. Really, ever since 2023 with his big time win over Jerusalem, Collazo has been in contention for the top 10. Across these past 2 years, he's had some real solid victories over Gutierrez and Zapata, but what's really elevating him is his stoppage victory over CP Freshmart last year. Combine that with the solid Kano win earlier this year and the even better Jason Vason victory, which, even ignoring the Vason fight controversy and the god-awful commentary where they tried making it out like Collazo was in serious trouble and losing the fight was primarily Collazo winning, with Vason having some moments of success in another dominant victory. Don't let the DAZN commentators tell you otherwise. But you could make the argument that Taraji should be higher than Collazo, which I do think is fair, but I find that Collazo is in better form right now, on top of the fact that the Freshmart victory is better than anything that Taraji recently has. Maybe if Taraji had beaten Garcia, I could have swapped Collazo and Taraji around, but with that fight getting cancelled last minute, it's a bit harder to justify that decision. At number 7, we have Artur Beterbiev. In terms of a specific year, I think 2024, no one had a better year than Beterbiev in terms of both quality of opposition and the performances given. The complete destruction of Callum Smith and defeating one of the greatest light heavyweight fighters of all time for the undisputed crown. Now in 2025, and his only fight was losing to Bivol. Now both fights have been met with varying opinions of who has won. I thought the first fight was definitively and clearly a Beterbiev win. Maybe I can make a video on that in the future. I thought the second fight was a bit closer, as both were far more sloppier with their offenses, and I had it 6 rounds apiece, a draw. I know others that had it slightly for Bivol or slightly for Beterbiev. Even then, losing to one of the best in today's game isn't going to get you removed out of the top 10. I know that Beterbiev is looking for the trilogy fight with Bivol, and we could potentially see a Benavidez fight next year, so Beterbiev could potentially rank at this spot or even higher depending on what happens next year. At number 6, I have Junto Nakatani. Nakatani is maybe coming off one of the strongest years yet in his career, where he had the 3-round stoppage victory over Contreras, the highly underrated Ryosuke Nishida, stopping him in 6 rounds for their unification, and his victory over Hernandez after moving up to 122. Combine this with his wins from last year against Santiago, Astrolabio, and Chipitana, and Nakatani has had some solid names he's defeated and a big time victory over Nishida. This is an instance where the sheer amount of volume of fight is putting his position higher, but even then the Nishida fight is still a great victory. I do think the Hernandez fight was decently close. I had Nakatani winning, however. Curious to see how Hernandez moves on from here to properly gauge how good he is, but that's really the only thing you can say that's holding Nakatani back from ranking higher. If 2026 does give us Nakatani versus Inoue and Nakatani wins, which that will place Nakatani in a much higher spot on this list. The future is very bright for Nakatani right now, and I'm very curious to see where he'll rank. At number 5 is Dmitry Bivol. Bivol, as previously mentioned, is coming off a victory over Artur Beterbiev, and like Beterbiev, he hasn't been super active, especially in comparison to some of the names we've already mentioned on the list. Of course, his surgery is a fault of such, but Bivol between both of these years is only looking at his Zenad stoppage victory, losing to Beterbiev, and then defeating Beterbiev. And I would be lying if I wasn't saying Beterbiev is really carrying him to this spot. You could honestly swap Nakatani and Bivol around if you really wanted, just based off the sheer volume Nakatani has, but the Beterbiev win is one of the best wins in its division's history, even if some have the scores a little bit different than the official cards. But it wouldn't surprise me if Bivol does get lower on this list, but if he does go on to defeat Beterbiev again and potentially Benavidez, Bivol could definitely maintain a top 5 spot or potentially look to be higher. At number 4 is Alexander Usyk. I find Usyk to be in a very similar spot to Bivol, where I think he's reached the height of his career in terms of pound for pound rankings, and I only see him getting lower on the list just due to who is at heavyweight. Up to this point, Usyk has had 2 victories over Tyson Fury, and then his stoppage victory over Daniel Dubois, which if you've seen my heavyweight tier list rankings, you'll know that I'm not the highest on Fury. I think he's good but not elite, and Dubois on a 3-fight win streak against solid dudes isn't anything to be greatly praising either. Even then, you can kind of inflate these wins by weight disparity, but that really more so applies to the Fury fights more than anything. Regardless, these are still 3 pretty good wins, all things considered, but considering who is left at heavyweight, maybe other than Caballero, which doesn't seem to be happening, I foresee that Usyk will be getting lower on this list, as there isn't virtually anyone that great remaining. Another one maybe being Aitama, assuming that Aitama does become something great later on, but Usyk doesn't really seem to be pursuing that fight. I'm not a fan of him pursuing Wilder right now. That fight doesn't do anything for Usyk's career and current pound for pound spot, since Wilder is in such a shell form of himself, so it will be interesting to see where Usyk planks the following year. Now for the top 3, I think you could reasonably make an argument that either of them are number 1, and it does depend on what you value, and if you think a bunch of wins together are better than an individual win. But starting off with the top 3, we have Naoya Inoue. Inoue has had a strong 2024 with 2 stoppage victories over Neri and Doheny, and in 2025 he had a whatever win against the late replacement Kim Ye-jun, a heated fight with Cardenas where he would go on to stop him mid-contest, a very dominant victory over MJ Akhmadaliev, and a very strong performance over Picasso as well. Some quality names and a great victory over MJ. You could get Inoue a bit higher just based off the volume and the performances given, but in terms of just great wins, it's really only been MJ as of late. But I think the 2 above Inoue have faced overall superior competition, and I do think if Inoue goes on to fight Nakatani, that will be another great win on his legendary career, and that can also maintain a top 3 spot for him, if not maybe even a little bit higher. In second place, we have Jesse Bam Rodriguez. I think maybe other than 2022, 2025 has been the year for Bam where he has shined out the most. Last year, Bam had a big time stoppage victory over Juan Francisco Estrada, later stopping Pedro Guevara, and this year he's unified the titles against Pumulele Cafu in a very strong outing, and maybe the most dominant win this year, his stoppage victory over Fernando Martinez, where Estrada and Martinez are 2 phenomenal and great wins. Cafu is also a pretty solid win as well, and with Bam having a Taraji fight on the horizon for Undisputed and some pretty good names at 118, Bam can potentially stack up some major fights next year, where I do think it will be a battle between him and Inoue for number 1 in 2026. Of course, that leaves us with number 1, with the only person left being Terrence Crawford. Bud is coming off one of the most impressive wins in boxing history, moving up almost 3 divisions to defeat one of the best 168 fighters of all time, where Bud would showcase the massive skill difference between him and Canelo, and greatly outbox him in winning the fight in a one-sided affair. The only real way you can downplay this victory is by saying Canelo isn't in his prime and is older, which to be fair, Bud also isn't in his prime and is also older, making it pretty fair circumstances all things considered. Add on top of the fact that Bud is moving up 3 divisions, and it really is one of the best wins ever. You also had the Madrimov victory last year, and I think Bud has the strongest case for pound number 1 right now. You can definitely make an argument that Bam is number 1 right now, and maybe Inoue as well, but Bud has clearly demonstrated he's the best currently. Of course, Bud has officially retired as well, so unless he returns, this will likely be the last time Bud ranks in the top 10. But if it is his last fight, what a way to end it. Anyways guys, thank you all for watching. Let me know down below what you think of this top 10, and let me know if you would have different ordering or if I potentially missed someone. Let me know all that down below. Anyways guys, thank you all for watching, and until next time, I will catch you all later.